Then there's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. They're calling it the She Session. The 2020 coronavirus pandemic is already disproportionately impacting women in the workforce in extraordinary ways. And yes, has put the American economy into a she session. And it is a sobering reality that when women lose jobs, it not only impacts the economy, it impacts families. And whether a woman is employed or not, the heavy domestic obligations that women have been burdened with has also been disproportionate during COVID, with women taking on increased tasks at home, like cleaning and child care, and now child schooling, and even elder care. And they're also reporting even more stress. And how many of these women, even if they had been able to hold on to their jobs, are doing the essential work in hospitals, factories, and the fields, and are often vulnerable to the COVID virus? And sorry, guys, but despite our boasts to the contrary, and though some of us have risen to meet the moment as husbands, cohabitators, and dads, many men are not doing their equitable share to help their partners, wives, mothers of the children in their lives, and are often making it worse, as the sobering and dramatic swells in our domestic violence reports sadly prove during our long spring stay-at-home quarantine. On this edition of Then There's California, we'll talk about how the virus that is still very much present in our lives has exposed already long-present gender fault lines in our society and in our communities, especially when it comes to pay equity and both on-the-job and at-home support, and how a full economic recovery from this so-called she session may not come quickly and will likely be even slower for women, and particularly for women of color. State Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson represents the 19th Senate District, including Santa Barbara County and part of Ventura County. Advocate, trailblazer, trendsetter, history maker, Senator Jackson is a leader in the Legislative Women's Caucus here at the state capitol. She is chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and pretty much every piece of state legislation and landmark California law related to equality, justice, privacy, workplace parity, sexual violence awareness and prevention, and one of the most historic pieces of pay equity legislation signed into law in this generation, have made California a better place to live because of Senator Jackson's tremendous work and influence. As has been my podcast protocol for the last several weeks, Senator Jackson and I are, as we speak, in an empty state capitol committee room where we can be appropriately socially distanced. It's good to see you again, Senator Jackson. Welcome back to Then There's California.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Unfortunately, then it got overshadowed by the fact that this is my last year in the legislature, and I was hoping to sort of close the loop on some of that legislation and some of those issues you had talked about. But obviously, we are in a crisis situation, and the goal is to try to help California get out of that situation as painlessly as possible, of course, with all the number of deaths and hospitalizations and economic challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has created. This is really quite a challenging year.
How are you doing, and how are things in the district?
Well, thank you for asking. You know, I have been taking very seriously the concerns about a virus that, when it began to rear its ugly head, we knew very little about. We saw the number of people who were dying from it, those who weren't dying, those who were infected with symptoms, really were suffering some pretty serious health conditions, even those who've come out of it, that it really has impacted congregate care facilities, particularly nursing homes for seniors and those with disabilities, and our prisons. But it also has had a tremendous impact on our general population. So my husband and I, both of whom are considered in that high-risk category because of our seniority, if you will, our veteran nature in life, really did take this seriously, and we have tried very much to be at home. But that doesn't mean that the work hasn't continued.
Oh,
in fact,
absolutely not.
I have discovered that I probably have been working longer hours and more intensely as a result of this, because there are tremendous needs in the district. There have been tremendous needs to give people a clear understanding of just the nature of this virus and how dangerous it is, how impactful it can be. And then, of course, to deal with the economic impacts as we try to flatten that curve, reduce the number of deaths. I mean, if you looked at what happened in New York City and in the state of New York with 125,000 people impacted, 40,000 deaths, a huge number that we in California chose to try to protect our communities and our health over the economy. I think a wise decision. But the impacts, of course, on the economy have been severe. And so as we try to gradually reopen, I'm a little suspicious of it. We still don't have a cure. We still don't have a vaccine or treatment. But we are trying to reopen. We do have a little better understanding of it, and hopefully the social distancing that we are experiencing here and wearing masks and washing hands regularly and being cognizant of the potential for this virus to spread through people who are asymptomatic, hopefully is going to be helpful. But I share with you a concern that the coronavirus is not done with us yet.
And having lived in Santa Barbara for 3 years in the late 80s, early 90s, I can speak with a little bit of familiarity.
Sure.
Contrary to what the image of the outside world might be in their image of Santa Barbara and Montecito and Summerlin and Goleta and Ventura County, it's not just the home of Oprah and Ellen and Carol Burnett. Your district, the 19th district, has a very robust but fragile service economy, a tourist economy, a lot of essential workers that are there propping up that beauty and a lot of that luxury.
No question about it. The tourist industry is really primary in much of the district, along with the agricultural industry. Right. And, of course, those are also considered essential workers. We make sure that our farm workers are out in the fields picking the food that we are going to eat. We need to make sure that there is a real understanding and awareness within that community because we want them out there every day. The same thing, of course, with our healthcare workers. And it's been a tremendous challenge for our hospitality community and our leisure community. Most of our hotels have closed, where a lot of our lower income workers have been able to support themselves and their families. This is on top of the terrible fire and then debris flow we had just 2 years ago. The economy was just starting to pick up. But the impacts on our healthcare workers, the impacts on our essential workers, and the economy that really drives this part of the world, you know, the Ventura Coast, the Santa Barbara Coast, beautiful places. We attract huge numbers of visitors every year, and they haven't been coming, and so people have been laid off, and the unemployment rate has been significant. Of course, it is throughout the state, but certainly people are desperate to try to maintain what they can and maintain their health while at the same time hoping that work will come again. And that's why one of the big issues in the district, the way it is, I think, throughout the state and the country, has been people trying to access unemployment assistance. The EDD has been terribly understaffed for years. The whole system is antiquated, and suddenly in one brief moment, we have had to try to create a 21st century response with, frankly, 20th century equipment and staffing. So it's been very frustrating. People have really been hurting, and we've been trying to be as helpful. My district staff has been wonderful, trying to do casework, helping people get access to these resources so they can stay in their homes, so they can feed their families.
And you're doing a lot of town halls with your legislative colleagues, Assemblymember Lamone, your congress member, to get the word out, right?
We've done, I think, 8 or 9 of them, trying to address key issues of concern to people. And, you know, this is a very difficult time, and there are no real answers. We can only do so much. Right. But we are trying to do the best that we can in those circumstances.
I need to tell the world, Senator Jackson and I had a very thorough discussion back in early March for a podcast about her legislation calling for the repeal of the pink tax. And we were just about to post the interview in early March, and then the impact of the coronavirus hit us and overwhelmed all of our social discussion and dialogue and our normal policy focus. And that bill had to be put on the shelf. And as a result, I had to put my podcast episode on the shelf. And I'm very glad and thankful and not surprised to find out that you, even in the midst of all of this, of course, are still proactive and front and center and focused on the issues and the populations and the communities that are directly affected by this pandemic.
Yes, that is true, not only within the district, but, you know, part of my work has been to address the issues of gender inequality,
yes,
whether it's in the in our economy, whether it's in our workforce, whether it's in our homes. And so this pandemic has really shined a Klieg light on the disparities that exist, the lack of equality for women. We are all home now, but women still continue to do 70% or more of the housework and certainly the child care. We now have our children home. There's no child care really available except in some instances to our essential workers, but in situations where women were in the workplace and relying upon either child care programs or grandma. And now, of course, grandma is at risk. And so this is really an opportunity for us to say, hey, once we get through this, what do we need to do to create a more equitable, more equal world and a workplace for women? And certainly addressing issues like a better child care system, more flexible work time, and understanding the demands of managing a household with children will hopefully move us into a better place as we look for some positives out of this horrific situation. I like to say we have to make lemonade out of lemons, and there are a lot of lemons there, but it's also a very, very important time to really ask ourselves, what can and should we be doing to level that playing field going forward?
Well, you are providing me just the perfect segue into this discussion, so let's just deep dive into it, particularly how this pandemic has further complicated the lives of women, working moms, stay-at-home moms, single parents overall. This new recession that we're coming into, this pandemic recession, is called a she-cession, with the pandemic disproportionately impacting women in the workforce, which then, of course, brings into the topic the current crisis affecting women personally, financially, particularly here in California.
Oh, absolutely. What we're seeing is that a lot of women now are simply leaving the workforce. Those who are able to work at home, they're being asked to continue working at home. Now they're teaching their children. Suddenly they're teachers. They're also having to provide that child care. Household duties now, again, are falling primarily on women. So we know that in so many of these areas, particularly in many industries where employee cuts have been made, women are not only losing their job, but they're losing them at disproportionately higher rates than men. So, for example, in the leisure and hospitality industry, which I mentioned was significant in my district, women accounted for 52% of the industry workforce, but make up 54% of the job losses. In education and health services, women make up 77% of the workforce, but accounted for 83% of the job losses. And the numbers continue at those levels. In retail, women were 48%, but are 61% of the job losses. So, yes, we are seeing women losing their jobs at greater percentages and then leaving the workforce because the challenges of working 20 hours a day have just left women exhausted and in many instances, frankly, suffering health problems associated with stress.
Absolutely. And, of course, being in these essential jobs, being at risk
Absolutely.
for coronavirus more than some of the average workers out there. And what you're saying reminds us that even during a pandemic, it's important to be vigilant about looking at and enforcing equal pay and anti-discrimination laws and keeping track of the data related to the workplace landscape, which is difficult even in the best of times, but particularly in a pandemic time, it's difficult and not an easy task, right?
Well, of course, the issue of pay inequity has been something that's been a great interest and a passion of mine to correct for maybe 40 years.
Yes.
And, of course, in 2015, when we passed SB 358, which is the Fair Pay Act, which was at the time the strongest equal pay bill in the nation, and now 43 other states, by the way, are using that legislation as a template for their own equal pay laws. What we did is we took a look, how do women fare competitively in the workplace to men? And even today, when we've made some advances, white women still make about 84 cents to every dollar a white man makes, but women of color really suffer at significantly greater levels, 62 cents for every dollar for black women and 44 cents, 46 cents for Latinas. So here we have these women who comprise, in many instances, either the sole breadwinner, the primary breadwinner, or their incomes are necessary for their families to make ends meet, are being paid significantly less, are now lacking access to quality or affordable child care, can't afford to pay for it even on a good day, but now there's such a limit on it, and where are they to go?
Talking about the data and keeping track of how women are paid, or just pay scales overall, nationally and here in California, not an easy task. And I know there's a lack of priority to this, as there seems to be a lack of priority for a lot of things in Washington and the Trump administration right now. You have a bill that you have introduced in this pandemic time, SB 973, that focuses on collecting that data. And that may seem like such a dry subject, but it's very important to keep vigilant about what's going on in this country and in the state regarding workplace and labor statistics, pay, other employment anti-bias type of things. So describe your bill.
Sure. Now we are taking this opportunity to look at ourselves in the mirror and looking at institutionalized systemic racism, gender bias. SB 973 would help close the wage gap with data by requiring that California's largest employers of 100 employees or more to report their salary data to the state. So it's based upon a provision that was created during the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. For the last 50 years, companies have to report information about their pay data, their pay information to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Yes. And
it's an EEO-1 form is what it's called. What the Obama administration did is said, let's look and see where there are institutional impediments to women achieving greater gender parity in the workplace. Let's look at the different categories of work and ask every company to look at themselves and to report on how many women are in the lower categories, how many women are in the middle and upper categories where the pay is higher. But not just women, people of color as well. Where are we seeing this systemic discrimination? Frequently not intentional. It's part of this whole notion of looking in the mirror, because if you ask most companies, they'll tell you, oh, we don't discriminate. But if you have to go and look at the data, that will likely show that most of the people of color or the women in your company are in the lower paying jobs, in the lower paying categories. So this will require that employers examine their own pay practices and take action to compensate their workers fairly, as well as improve their hiring practices. So hiring, promotion, making sure that California employers, as I mentioned, with 100 or more employees, submit that pay data report annually to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, outlining compensation and hours worked of employees by gender, by race, by ethnicity, and by job category. This is something that the Obama administration spent several years putting together. The Trump administration
dismantled it.
Dismantling it. Anything that the Obama administration did, this administration, whether it was good or not, it doesn't matter. They are trying to undermine and dismantle this effort. And, of course, here in California, we are more than prepared, willing, and able to get to the heart of this discrimination, irrespective of what the federal government is doing.
It's a great enforcement tool.
Absolutely.
Right?
And the goal really is to get companies to see what they're doing and to correct it on their own. If there needs to be follow-up through the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, if there needs to be follow-up by staff and employees in the companies, fine. But it's my hope that this bias is really not intentional, but we do have enormous gaps in our equality in this country, and a lot of it is implicit bias, and this is designed to put that mirror up to the face of that implicit bias and correct it.
One of the other issues, the platforms that you are working right now, happens to be childcare. The challenge that keeps most working moms, most working parents up at night right now, well, even in normal times, but particularly now in a pandemic, is the childcare issue. And knowing this firsthand in my own family, if we as a society and as a state don't do something urgent and intentional about addressing it, the least that's going to happen is women will have no choice but to leave the workforce. Availability and affordability of childcare is a challenge no matter what time it is. Parents are still struggling with this balance. You have also a new bill in these times, SB 1383, that gives parents some leeway, some flexibility with their employer to take time off during emergency times.
Well, of course, we do have the California Paid Family Leave Act, which does give parents and employees some time. It's a minimal amount of time, and frequently it's unpaid, and it has to be, you have to work for an employer of a particular size. Lots of inequities and requirements and obstacles that really don't exist, frankly, in most other countries that recognize the importance of women in the workplace. But this is a bill that I introduced to expand job-protected leave for working parents who are affected by school and child care closures as a result of a declared federal, state, or local emergency, hence what we see with COVID-19. This will strengthen a bill that I worked on called the Family School Partnership Act, to allow all of California's working parents to take job-protected unpaid leave. Now, that's really important. This is not going to, this doesn't whack an employer. It's unpaid leave, but to take it as a result of school closures, childcare, or school emergencies. So, for example, today we are seeing kids are home. They didn't have the last 2 months of school. Parents who are working, they take all the leave that's available. Do they go back to work? Many employers have said, look, you have a choice. You come back to work or you lose your job. And for many parents, that's not a fair choice, because where are they going to leave their children? Mm-hmm. So this is a bill that says, look, we're going to recognize the importance of family. Family is a priority here in circumstances where we're in these extraordinary times. We are under an emergency now. There are times where we have wildfires. Many of us have been through those, and recognize schools get closed. There is no child care. People's homes have burned down who provide child care, or there's emergencies that exist. What are parents supposed to do when they've taken all the leave that's available to them and an employer says, come back or you're fired? And so this is a bill that just simply says we are going to allow leave to be extended beyond the 40 hours a year that people otherwise might have if they work for employers of 25 or more.
And 40 hours is not a lot.
Is not a lot. That's 5 days. It's a week. Certainly in circumstances like the pandemic that we're experiencing now, is just not enough. And so this is a legislation that just recognizes, in the industrial world, we are one of the few countries that does not have adequate child care or recognize the importance of child care in our society.
I want to unpack this whole issue a little bit more since I have you here. Whether women are working or not, these moms are still facing a huge domestic burden. Yes, the child care, running the household, a hamster wheel effect that takes hold in women's lives. Women are historically, traditionally tasked with carrying out this cognitive labor for household activities, which in the last 3 months, as we've talked about, has included homeschooling. They already face a gender pay gap. So when the duties of child care are increased, it's the woman who takes on the burden most of the time because, hey, she's bringing in less money. Maybe she's not working right now. She's got free time. So this could be a potential disaster, at the very least a frustration for a lot of women, not only here in California, but across the country.
Well, I think we have historically devalued or undervalued women's work at home. And if there's one good thing that comes from this, hopefully men who are sharing, quote unquote, sharing those duties and are working from home or are at home realize this is hard work. And there is very little, quote unquote, free time when you're caring for children, particularly young children, and certainly when you are trying to homeschool them. So hopefully we'll gain a better appreciation. But it isn't just being at home with children. Women are traditionally the caregivers. Yes. And we know in California we are an aging state. So there are a lot of women out there who are also providing care for their aging parents or their grandparents, or providing when this older generation starts getting sick. Who's going to take them to their doctor's appointments? Who's going to watch after them when they're going through particularly rough patches or in their final days? Who are going to be the caregivers? We just did a hearing this morning on the inadequacies of our nursing home programs here in California. We don't have enough nursing home beds, and the quality of our nursing care in California, and I think nationwide, is heavily suspect. So if you are someone whose parents are aging, and we are living longer, we are seeing greater cognitive challenges as people age, who is going to care for our aging family? And the answer is it's women. So how are we supposed to do this as women? How do you manage a family? How do you manage your work? And how do you manage giving care to your sick family members, your aging family members? we do not have the infrastructure. And so we rely upon women primarily to provide those services, and they're unpaid. They're rarely paid. We have now fought to have our in-home workers be able to unionize so that they can receive a fair wage for the work they do, that the conditions upon which we ask them to work are reasonable, and we are trying to fight hard to get recognition for the value of this work, the value to our families, and the critical need if we are going to be able to take care of our seniors, our elders, and also take care of our families at home. These are challenging times, and women are in the workforce today primarily because they need to be, because they are the sole breadwinner or the primary breadwinner, or their incomes are necessary to pay the rent or to keep food on the table, to give people the opportunity to keep their heads above water. And it's just something we have not recognized in our society. Many other countries have and been very successful. You look at Scandinavia. They provide free childcare from the ages of 1.5 until children start school. They pay for their parents to stay at home for maternity leave for a period of a year, up to 1.5 years, and then have this transition into early care and education while the parents go back to work. There is no reason that we don't do that in this country other than the fact that the big corporate influences here have said, oh, we can't afford to do that. And I think as a society, we can't afford not to do that.
I agree. I want to hold up the light of criticism to my half of the gender population, to men who still very much need to step up at home. There has been some concern from sociologists and opinion writers that this pandemic is becoming a patriarchal pandemic and that women are feeling the imbalances acutely in so many areas that you have touched upon. Is that exaggeration on what we're facing, or does this really just connect with what you're already talking about?
Well, I see this as a learning moment. I see this as a moment for men to step up. I think that for moms to step up and dads, as we educate our children, the next generation should really be much more open-minded to sharing the responsibilities of work at home. And to share the child-rearing responsibilities. That's why legislation I did last year calls for both men and women to be able to take job-protected family leave, maternity and paternity leave during the first 3 months of a child's life, to take those responsibilities and to bond with their newborns. It benefits everybody. It benefits the child. It benefits mom in the whole issue of postpartum depression. It benefits dad in creating a lifelong bond with those children. The responsibilities for bearing and rearing children should not lie 100% with women. Now, the bearing part, we haven't figured that one out yet, but certainly men need to be more sensitive to the needs of women during that period of time, and certainly postpartum, participating in those late night, early morning feeding sessions, being there to learn how to change diapers, learn how to deal with a colicky child, learn how to address that early developmental relationship and be part of it, and to enjoy the bad times as well as the good. It's not just here, Dad, kiss the baby goodnight and take a little cereal and pop it in his or her mouth in the morning and feel like you're being a great parent.
Right. I've read the good night story, honey, can you come put him to bed?
That's right.
And interesting, we talked about this before we started, some of the tweets, some of the social media of men saying, I spent time with my child today and I'm doing a lot of things while I'm at home and helping out my wife, and the wife's in the background. Not necessarily.
Well, it's true. And I think hopefully as men and women get more comfortable with women in the workplace, with women hopefully being able to reach levels of success and be in the boardroom as leaders of their communities and of their businesses, and we see more women as doctors and lawyers, and really being able to compete professionally, that men will recognize that having a family or being part of a relationship should be a co-equal relationship. And it's learned behavior that we have to both unlearn and reteach so that these responsibilities are shared and shared equally.
We are participating now in an experiment of sorts. Wouldn't you agree? that's affording us the opportunity to consider how we want to live and move forward after this crisis passes. And there really is a lot of power in small changes, even in a household.
There absolutely is. But I think that what we need to do as we go back into the workforce, we have to recognize where some of these glaring weaknesses are. That's why I mentioned the Klieg lights, right. Glaring weaknesses in the whole child care infrastructure. We need to do better. We need to have more affordable, quality child care available as women get back into the workforce. We need to recognize the need for more flexible work hours. We're seeing now that a lot of work can and is done at home. And in fact, for a lot of employers, they're realizing that their employees actually are working longer hours at home. We need to create a greater flexibility in our work scheduling so that there's more opportunity to participate in school activities, for example, or to be able to take a loved one to a doctor's appointment or to take care of one's own health. You know, part of the problem with this COVID situation is there are people who went to work when they were sick because they couldn't afford to stay home. Right. And we will probably see a relapse in this situation coming forward. We need people, we need to encourage them to stay home when they're sick. So we need better paid sick leave. We need it available for everybody. We need greater access to flexibility in access to health care.
Yes.
Another critical issue that we are really woefully behind in. So these are some of the issues, the social issues, that have to be addressed, and they're economic issues. So it is my hope that we come out of this with a greater appreciation for how to fix these systemic problems. My fear is it's always easy to fall back on what you know. But we need strong voices. We need strong feminist voices. We need strong male voices that recognize the importance of moving forward with greater equality in the workplace and greater equality at home.
I want to shine a further Klieg light on a really sobering element of this, which is domestic violence.
Yes.
The stay-at-home orders over the last few months have further endangered women and girls around the world. Violence against women has increased by more than 25% in the last 3 months. It's shameful. It is shameful.
It is shameful. It is shocking, but it's not totally surprising, sadly. And part of the reason is that we as a society have not done a good job teaching respectful relationships. We are far too often more inclined to consider women to be subservient, to subjugate. There's a lot of misogyny and machismo in our cultures, and the lack of respect and equal dignity is shameful, as you say. And so we need to do better. We need to, and frankly, I've done a lot of legislation on this as well.
Yes, you have.
Whether it's in our college setting, when we talk about what is affirmative consent in sexual relationships, we brought that down to the high school, and down to actually even the earliest grades, talking to children, to boys and girls, about being respectful to each other. That we cannot and should not be measuring our value and our strength by how we are able to tear down others. And again, we live in a very paternalistic world, a very misogynistic world with this lack of gender respect and equality. And so at the very earliest ages, we need to do better. We need to teach children, and we need to teach all of us that the way to resolve our differences is not through violence. We need to defuse and treat each other with greater respect, with greater kindness, with greater understanding throughout the spectrum.
And the more that is done at home, the greater we benefit in society at large.
Absolutely, because we learn our behavior from our family. And that's why domestic violence has been such an endemic problem, is because it's a cycle that we learn at home. We model ourselves after our parents in many ways. And so it's really important that we break that cycle through education, through information, that we have interventions in those circumstances, and that we empower women to leave those kinds of violent situations. We know that women frequently stay because they have been isolated from their families, from their support groups. They're afraid for their children. They have no access to resources. They have nowhere to go. And these are problems that society has been trying to address for a number of years, but we have to do better on many different levels, from education to the resources to help women break that cycle and get away from their violent perpetrators.
Well, we need to do better by having more Hannah-Beth Jacksons in the world. Well, more female leaders. Come on, you mentioned this earlier. If we had more female leaders in this world, the world might be better able to anticipate some of the problems that we're having right now. Denmark, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Norway, Taiwan, New Zealand, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, they've pretty much eradicated COVID in their country, thanks in part to her leadership.
Well, I think we do need more women in positions of leadership. Certainly we have incredibly qualified women. The problem is that we, particularly in this country, hold women to a very different standard, and we judge women more harshly. And yet you take a look at leaders like Merkel in Germany.
Angela Merkel in Germany,
Merkel.
yes.
We've had some outstanding women leaders, and to this very day, when you look at the battle against COVID and the successes that have occurred, they have been women leaders. So one of the things, when you look at the difference in leadership style, women tend to be more collaborative in their leadership styles and have greater emotional intelligence. So we feel things. We are more sensitized to how do you get people to yes without having to threaten them with violence? How do you sit down in a room and get people to agree without threatening them? And people are more responsive when you do that. And so I think that we have seen examples of that. We certainly have created pipelines to leadership, whether it's been in the courts. When I first started practicing law, there were very few women judges, arguably because, well, there weren't that many women in the law. Well, now we have almost 50% of our law school students are women, and we have more women practicing, and we have more women on the bench, and we have more people of color as well, and we need to do better in encouraging our communities of color, and our black community in particular has raised that issue and put that mirror in front of us. And there has been incredible racism in this country. There has been incredible violence against people of color, particularly black men and women, since the beginning of the Republic. And now we see it more clearly because we have those cameras that show in real time, in some instances, that kind of abuse. And now is the time for us to change those systems, the racism, the misogyny, the ethnic violence, the anti-Semitism. We have an opportunity in this country to do better and to become better people and to really meet the promise of this country, which is that if you come here to America, and you come here believing that if you work hard, you do your best, and you play by the rules, anything is possible. That is the key to success. And it should be the key to success for everyone, male, female, white, black, people of different religions, gender equality, regardless of one's sexual orientation. I mean, that really is the promise of this country, and we have not kept that promise. And we have an opportunity now to move more into that direction, into that light.
So this pandemic offers us that reset opportunity in all those areas that you talked about, based on your extraordinary career and what you've seen in this world and the crises that we have been through over the decades. Are you optimistic here in June of 2020?
The answer is you have to be optimistic, because if you're not, you give up, and you can never give up. So, I remember watching Martin Luther King speak by way of black and white television when I was a kid growing up, and the Great March on Washington back in the 60s, and the Civil Rights Movement and the anti-war movement. We thought we really were making some progress, and then there were the Rodney King riots. We thought that we were going to see a change in the attitudes that the establishment, if you will, had towards people of color and women, and yet not that much has changed. So I am hopeful. I am hopeful because we have a new generation of leadership. We have people who are demanding better, and we just have to keep that up. We have to be vigilant, because the patriarchy, the powers of money and influence will take every opportunity to get themselves back in power if we don't force change to occur. And I think certainly the conversation is there, the opportunity is there. I hope we get there. Should women just kick men to the curb, with all due respect, and do this on their own? And I don't mean this glibly, but, for example, women have had to push forward with the progress that they have made
really without the help of men. The right to vote. They protested, they pushed hard, they sacrificed. They got the right to vote without a lot of help from men. Women investing in each other, securing their own agency. What do you say to that?
Well, I think it's important that women insist upon a seat at the table. One of my most favorite quotes is from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was asked, when will we have real equality? And she said, when there are 9. And, of course, that's
Amen.
a reference to having
Yes.
9 women on the Supreme Court, because for how many hundreds of years we've had 9 men.
Right.
I like to think that there are a lot of younger men today who want equal partnerships with women, that respect women, that are appreciative of the difficulties and the challenges and the obstacles that women have had to overcome. So I wouldn't dismiss cooperation from our male colleagues and counterparts. I would like to invite them to join us, but we can't wait for them to come to the table to be with us. We can't wait for them to join us. We have to keep moving in a forward and positive direction and encourage them to join us in that pursuit.
Beautifully said. One of the perks of my job is being able to sit and have these conversations with you, Senator Jackson.
I appreciate that.
And as we wrap up, I want to end this conversation with the way we began it, talking about what is ahead for you in 2020 and beyond. As you mentioned, the entire state looks nothing like it did 3 months ago, much less 6 months ago, much less 3 days ago. And after an extraordinary career in the California legislature, the historical, fiscal, and gender equity policies that have become law under your name, 2020 is your last year in office. This was not the year, as you say, you expected this to be. This is not the victory lap. This is not the mic drop you thought it was going to be as you walk out of here. I know the battle doesn't end with you when you leave the legislature in November. I know the charge and the dedication doesn't end. But how are you reconciling all that as you head towards the end of 2020, looking back at your career, looking ahead at what you're going to do, and how 2020 hasn't turned out to be what it was supposed to be?
Well, you know, when you've lived as long as I have, you realize that there are good days and bad days. But I'm very proud of the work that I've done. I'm very honored to have worked with the people I have. I feel very blessed that I've had this opportunity. I still have, I think, a lot of energy and a lot of passion left.
Good.
So I'm not quite sure where the road will take me, but, you know, it's a new adventure. What is it? When a door closes, a window opens. Mm-hmm. And I certainly look forward to spending time with my wonderful grandchildren who don't live close enough, and certainly now with the COVID situation, even when they do, we have to be circumspect about having that contact. I want to smell the roses a little bit more. This job, in spite of what some folks might think, really is it's an 8-day-a-week job, I say, in order to do it right. But there is much to be done to the extent that I still have the desire, the energy, and the interest, all of which I think are there. I will continue to perhaps share my wisdom, and I think we all
hope so.
Develop wisdom as we, I think age really does have some benefits, and I think that we shouldn't give short shrift to people as they get older because, we've lived through it. I mean, life doesn't really change. Human nature will always be the same. Some of the circumstances might be different. We certainly have a greater technological world. We've seen advances, amazing advances in a lot of areas, but we're still human beings. And so to the extent that I can share my experiences with others, I look forward to that. I'm looking forward to reflecting a little bit on the life I've been very blessed to lead, maybe sit down and jot down a memoir of something, or
that would be wonderful.
I'm looking forward to the next iteration, the next chapter.
Good.
Again, wish that things had been a little different, but there are two ways to look at life. One is that the glass is half full, and one is that the glass is half empty. And I just insist that glass is half full. So even though it's a tough year, it isn't quite what I had expected. I'm hoping to be able to turn some of that lemon into lemonade. And I'm still looking forward to some of the bills that I'm hoping to get across the finish line, and working with my colleagues to help at least put things in a position so that they can pass the baton on to them and let them run with it, because I have a lot of confidence that we've got some really great people here and a lot of vision to be implemented in the years to come.
Well, that's good to hear, because no time to stop and smell the roses yet. Still a lot of work to do between now and December. Genuinely, California sleeps better at night knowing that you are out here and doing all this work. So thank you for this time in the middle of everything going on to spend this time with me here on Then There's California.
Well, thank you, Brian. Always a pleasure.
And that is a wrap for this edition of Then There's California. We are a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical assistance and great ideas from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulte, Brian Shadden, Rainier Sabiniano, Gunjan Patel, John Roman, McLeana Woods, Lisa Murphy, Faith Colburn, and the graphic design talents of Tim Davis. On behalf of State Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson of Santa Barbara, I'm Brian Green at the state capitol in Sacramento. Take care, everyone, and thanks for listening to Then There's California.